going to get started. Is everyone good on the bit.ly? Is everyone able to access it?
It is case sensitive.
Okay, I can see that. All right, I don't know. So my name's Amy Owsley, and I am a secondary design coach, as we all are, and I primarily support science.
I'm Kelsey Anselmi. I primarily support math and 6th grade ELAR.
And Andrew Hutchison, I primarily serve CTE and 8th grade ELAR.
And y'all know me. Same.
All right, so our essential question for today is how do we differentiate instruction to push kids towards mastery? So that's what we'll be focusing on today, about talking about CFAs. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you're good.
Yeah.
Here's our roadmap. We're going to talk about 4 different parts. How to break down an upcoming standard into learning progressions or stepping stones. How to make a CFA based on one of those learning progressions. How to look at the data once you've given a CFA and thus differentiate based on what that data tells you.
So we're going to start off today by doing, kind of putting you in the student role. So if you could grab a Post-it note or 2 or 3, how many ever you want, and if you could write down the learning progressions or the steps in order to make a PB&J sandwich. So there are Post-it notes right there. And I'll give you about, I'll bring it up here. Give you about 2 minutes to complete this task.
You want a different plate?
We're doing our own.
You can do it together, you can do it alone.
Do it together.
And then do you have any kids with a peanut allergy?
Sure.
I have a wheat allergy.
Oh yeah, nobody in here has
Don't put
peanut,
it near me.
but wheat. Okay. We can wipe it down before we leave, Evan. We'll wipe it
If
down.
it's in the room, is that okay, Cindy?
You have to require.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay, just so.
Like, we have to require all this. Are we doing it together?
Yeah, you have to get all the ingredients first.
You gotta get you right.
You gotta start. And unfortunately, Kelly brought strawberry jelly.
Like she did.
I said,
You said Kelly.
Kelly jelly.
Because I was doing Kelsey jelly.
Let's look at the video of it.
Kelsey, Kellyanne?
Open back and front.
Oh, Asian hair.
I think you should do it. I think you'd be a great person.
Yeah, good.
This is my lunch though this time, so next time you come.
You've already put your name.
Oh yeah. Poked a hole in there.
Broke a plate.
Yeah, broke the plate. Be about 1 more minute.
Anything that you can think of? Okay. Let me know if you think of anything.
Okay.
So 2 slices.
30 seconds.
Jelly jar.
Here's your mom.
Jelly jar. Kelsey, and Kelly.
With ingredients in the middle.
I told you they found them last year in their email sent out. Please congratulate Andrew Hutchison, the technology teacher of the month.
Andrew?
All right, you're done?
Andrew.
Nice.
Heard about that
Awesome.
one for like a solid month.
All right, Andrew, will you read this for me?
Okay, so I'm gonna read your steps out loud, and Kelsey is going to follow the steps to put together. All right, first step, get all of the ingredients. Open bag of bread.
Okay.
Take out 2 slices. Open PB jar.
Okay,
Get a knife.
got it.
Dip knife in PB.
Okay.
Spread on bread evenly on one side of bread.
Spread what?
Spread on bread evenly on
Okay.
one side of bread.
Okay.
Get another knife.
Out of those.
Dip in jelly jar.
Okay.
So you don't have another knife? That's a fail.
Yeah,
Ah.
we don't use the same knife in both the jars,
I
that's
can
not
only
okay.
afford, we also don't use
Did
strawberry
she
jelly.
say open the jelly jar?
She did not, right?
Get another knife, dip in jelly jar.
I'm sorry, I thought you said, did she say? Because I thought it was a we thing.
Did we, I was hearing, I was listening.
We.
Oh, I was
You
listening
should
to
have
her.
participated,
She
now it's a
said,
we thing.
she said, that's why I said, she said.
Dip in jelly jar.
Okay.
Spread on other piece of bread. Close bread together with PB&J in the middle.
Okay.
Enjoy.
I love that.
The TV and J are not filling up the two jars in the middle.
Oh.
Put PB in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no jelly in the middle.
Well, that's odd.
No jelly.
Gonna go down, gonna go down.
Exactly.
Oh.
She's really mad because this is gonna be her lunch today.
Yeah, well, I'm still gonna make it my lunch. All right, so based on your learning progressions and what I've created from your learning progressions, would you say I've mastered this learning standard?
Not so much,
Okay, tell me why, Evan.
because miss vital steps of the peanut butter coming out of the jar can be spread as well as the jelly, and you won't have one knife. So,
Sorry, I let you down with
Shot.
one knife. I will do better next time. Okay, so why would we put you through this simulation as educators? Think about it from a social studies lens.
Just to be more clear with directions,
Okay,
and more clear with what your essentials are.
What you're looking for.
okay.
Tell me where she needs to be by the picture.
Well, if we're asking questions, we have to ask questions guided towards what we're actually trying to assess, which means that we have to get rid of all the extra flow.
Mhm. Okay. What about prior knowledge? Is that-
So you wrote,
Well, I mean, we know what their prior knowledge is, so hopefully they
No.
should be able to enact on their prior knowledge.
Do they all have the same prior knowledge?
Well, if they've been with us, they should.
Okay, what about the kid that just moved in?
Well, then no, and we would have to assess that.
Right, we have to figure out where they're at, right? So we have to have these standards open access for all kids, right? And so when we don't have kids that have been in our system the whole time, or we have kids that move in, or kids from different countries, we have misconceptions, right? So Amy, do you want to tell your story?
I made my first peanut butter and jelly sandwich at 21, and I'm born and raised in Oklahoma. So I mean, I'm not from another country. I'm from peanut butter and jelly is a common thing for my area. It just wasn't a common thing for me and my family. My mom was the only one that ate peanut butter sandwiches, and she ate peanut butter sandwiches. She didn't put jelly on them. So and nobody else in my family ate them. So again, I'm an American from Oklahoma, right? And peanut butter and jelly sandwiches were not something that I had prior knowledge of. Yeah, I mean, I'd seen them. I knew what a sandwich was, right? But me never making them could affect my understanding of that and mastery of that skill, right?
Also, I want to point out the assumption that kids would know what PB&J stand for, right? So it's pretty staple in American culture, but if you have a kid coming from elsewhere, it may not be a staple, right? We may have to define what PB&J are, right? And what a sandwich is, right? We take those things for granted, so we've got to really think when we're looking at our own standards in social studies, right? How those learning progressions fit and where we can catch kids along the way so that we don't make this sandwich, so that we actually get to the end goal that we want.
and I want to bring up something that was brought up in a previous session today. They said, well, you have to know what the mastery is. So are we looking for it looks like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Are we looking for it's edible? Are we looking for it tastes good? Like what exactly is our mastery of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Because without that, it makes it really hard to have that conversation of did we master that task?
So you guys have the presentation, go ahead, since it's just y'all, go ahead and click on the social studies link. We did it for other content areas, but since you guys are just social studies. We took a standard that is differentiate or compare the causes and consequences of the American and the French Revolution. So what we have done is we have taken that standard and broken it down into learning progressions. So besides this first box, and can I touch your screen or will it break?
No,
Okay.
sure.
Okay, Rupert's freaked on me. Forget this box. What do you notice about this left box? What do you notice about that right box?
Well, we talked about this when we made these, right? So we're talking about identifying versus comparing and contrasting, because those are two separate abilities.
Okay, tell me more about how it's two separate abilities.
Because identifying is a precursor to being able to compare and contrast. If you can't identify, you can't compare and contrast.
Okay, for sure. So would you say that this is I'm gonna watch my wording. Would you say this is an easier thing to do for kiddos when they walk in the door day one of the unit?
Yes,
Okay? Will they need to master this in order to get here?
absolutely.
Okay? Exactly. We're trying to think of, we also think of in this standard, where are the misconceptions that kids are gonna fall in? So, what would they need to know coming into it? Sometimes we're gonna have kids walk in the door day one, they already know this, so we can kind of move on. This is what we want to hold all students to master the standard, right? But if we notice, it gets really, really complicated. Or not really complicated, it gets really, really more
Complex.
yeah, complex, that's the word I was looking for, thank you. What we want the kids to know and be able to do. So in your PLCs, when you guys break down that standard, like you guys have those conversations of, okay, if we have a student who walks in day one of the unit, can't do this, what are we gonna do to get them to that box? You know, if they come below this box, how are we gonna get them to this first box? What questions are we gonna ask? What scaffolds are we gonna use? What assessments are we gonna give to make sure that they know that? Conversely, also, if we have a history nerd that walks in day one, man, they can rattle off that. What are we now gonna do to push them? Because we don't want them just sitting there. And I'm not saying that this happens, but we're just talking, if they've already mastered the standard, now how are we gonna push them? So this is just an example, and I know you guys already do that. So do you guys wanna add on from what y'all seen from y'all's content areas or anything like that?
I just want to add, just think of those as fundamental skills, right? So not necessarily easier or more difficult, just fundamental. They have to be able to do this. And I'm going to use a science example real quick. So our chemistry, in the chemistry PLC, there are 6 teachers. And we were working on this together because we were trying to determine what mastery looked like. And the standard says, define a mole. That's it. Define. DOK level 1, right? The most basic level. And so we said, okay, what does mastery look like for define a mole? And there were 6 teachers, and 6 of them gave a different answer for something as simple in our minds as define. So what we've got to do is get on the same page about what mastery will actually look like, and then what are the fundamental skills we need to get there, right?
And we know, especially in social studies, that our standards can be really, really vague. So in 8th grade, one might read, discuss the leadership qualities of George Washington. Well, what I think of as leadership qualities might be completely different than someone else on my team. So as a PLC, we have to have those conversations about what are the leadership qualities that we're gonna teach our students. All right, so how do you come up with those with that learning progression? So your first step, go over here, would be to just take that master standard, which was differentiate between the American and French Revolution, or compare and contrast. So you're gonna say what all of the students have to be able to do in order to get to that standard. So just like you did with PB&J, you would just list it.
You got those markers, sorry.
Throw it away.
Students like the items.
Okay, so you would just like list it. There we go. And then as your PLC, you would just talk about what are we gonna chunk together. So maybe this is the first thing they have to be able to do. And then they can do these 2 things, and then these 2 things, and that's your blocks. So you can have 2, you can have 3, maybe there's 4. But that's how you can build those learning progressions. What are those blocks they have to do to get to mastery?
This team recently did a good job too. We broke down their upcoming unit, or the unit that they're in now, where we went through all those essential standards pretty recently and kind of went through and did that part of it.
Awesome.
I think the next step was, getting probably, what do you guys think, more formative assessments, or more like how we see how that data breaks down for those units probably?
Yeah.
So what was the student outcomes when you broke that down? What did you see in your classrooms as a result of that?
Are we still in that unit right now? Okay.
Well, we're not finished with it, so,
So we got 2 more weeks.
I mean, but with all the CFAs that we've done, they're scoring high, like it's good. I mean, we still have the same, they the same grades, but overall, their scores are good.
That's awesome.
What about in the planning of that unit, in the creation of those CFAs? Has that changed the conversation? So you said this is what mastery looks like. Has it changed your conversation about how to create those? Because you said you CFA it all the time, I think, right? So has it changed how you create those CFAs and what you're looking for and the types of questions that you're asking students?
It does change questions.
We just use like because a lot of it's project-based, it's a lot of other stuff, and like the thing we're doing after spring break is literally a compare and contrast to more
Yeah.
focused on that, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Is that different from what you guys did last year on it too? Like, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of the same, similar stuff, but changing the way we go about like what we're looking for.
More focused on what you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so going back to, so we've decided and we've determined what mastery looks like. Hang on, I'm gonna try to get this going. Wow. This happened earlier too.
It's spinning. I might have to retype something.
Is it spinning?
I
Oh,
can't
wait, I
even
may
tell.
have one.
There it
There it is, okay.
Okay.
All right, so you've talked about, okay, you've created your learning progressions, right? So, and this is a document for you guys to use in your PLC. Just is created, Sam created it. So you've created your learning progressions, you've had that conversation. Now we can differentiate using that information, right? So how are we gonna get kiddo from fundamental skill 1 to fundamental skill 2 if they're coming in at fundamental skill 1, right? Or it's not even coming in, it's, hey, we have assessed and we see that kid is at 1, right, or kid is at 2, how are we gonna get them moved to that next level? So that's the conversation and that's what this can kind of help you do.
And we chose this one, or Beth and I chose this one because we know this one's very, very broad. And this is the one that we have the most conversations about, like what do they need to know to understand the modern culture of the Middle East or the modern culture of Africa? What do they need to know historically? So that's why we put that one on there to use it in this unit or in future units.
All right, so if you would, on the Padlet, if you'll click the link for the Padlet. And then what we're doing here is we are pre-assessing your knowledge of CFAs, right? So we're giving you a pre-assessment. So,
Oh, sorry,
Oh, no,
I was
it's okay.
closing some tabs, so that's
oh no,
still
you
okay.
can, it's okay. So
Okay,
the
got it.
first 3 questions, the what is and how do we create them and all of that,